The river was high and brown with spring melt, talking loud to itself the way lonely things do, and the man on the bank had just finished telling himself he was done helping anybody, when he heard the scream cut through the cottonwoods like a ripped shirt. It was sharp and desperate and full of life, and before his mind could catch up, his boots were already sliding down the muddy bank, because some instincts live deeper than hurt, deeper than vows made to stay alone. He saw her tumble out of the current, white dress snagged on a half-drowned willow, hair loose and dark and spread across the water like spilled ink. She was fighting the river wrong, panic burning her strength fast, and he did not think about his bad leg or the years since he last touched another soul. He waded in with a growl, water slamming his thighs, then his waist, cold enough to steal breath, and he reached her just as the branch gave way. She went under and took him with her, the river roaring in his ears like the past coming back. His hands found cloth and bone, and he wrapped one arm around her and kicked sideways, letting the current carry them instead of fighting it, rolling until his shoulder hit gravel, and he dragged them both up coughing and soaked, her chest heaving against his eyes, wide and alive. And that was the moment his loneliness cracked. Though he did not know it yet, she lay there gasping, staring at the sky like it had betrayed her. Then she turned her head and looked at him, really looked, rain-grey eyes meeting dust-grey ones, and she laughed once, breathless and half-mad, and said, "You got a terrible way of minding your own business, mister," and he surprised himself by smiling back, because no one had talked to him like that in years. They made a small fire under the trees, steam rising off their clothes, and when her shaking settled she told him pieces, not the whole thing, just enough. A wedding dress borrowed, not loved, a man waiting in a town she never named, vows that felt like a cage, and a horse she rode too hard until the river took the choice out of her hands. She said it plain and strong, but her fingers worried the hem of that ruined dress, and he understood running even if he had never run fast enough himself. He offered her coffee from a battered pot and did not ask her name, because names made things stick, and she thanked him like it mattered, because to her it did. The way she held the tin cup with both hands told him she had known kindness and missed it. The way she sat close to the fire told him she was not done being afraid, and the space between them felt charged, not with wanting, but with recognition. He told her he lived upriver in a cabin that leaned but still stood, that she could dry out there and decide what came next, and he said it like it was nothing, like opening his door to a stranger was not a small miracle. She studied his face, the scar at his jaw, the careful way he moved, and she nodded, because sometimes trust comes not from safety but from shared damage. As they walked along the bank, the sun dropping low and turning the water gold, he felt something he had buried stir awake, not hope exactly, but the ache that comes before it, and she walked beside him barefoot and brave, dress in tatters, future unknown, and neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it. The river had taken something from each of them, and given something back. To the cabin sat where the pines thinned, and the river bent slow and thoughtful, weathered boards silvered by years of sun and regret, and when he pushed the door open, the smell of smoke and old wood rolled out like a memory he had never finished. She stepped inside, cautious but curious, eyes taking in the rough table, the single bed, the shelf of chipped cups, and she smiled a little, as if she had expected worse, as if a place made by a lonely man was still better than a life chosen by fear. He set her dress near the fire to dry, and handed her a blanket without comment, and the quiet between them was not heavy, but listening. Night came gentle and wide, coyotes calling far off, and they ate beans and salt pork while the fire popped. She talked then, really talked, about growing up on a small spread with brothers who rode hard and laughed louder, about learning early that a woman's no could be bent by enough pressure, about the man she was meant to marry being decent enough but not right, not kind in the ways that mattered. And he listened without fixing, without judging, because he knew how it felt to be spoken over by fate. When he told her his piece, it came out slow and rough. A wife buried on a hill marked by a crooked stone, a ranch lost to debt and bad luck, a leg ruined when a horse fell wrong, and years spent thinking solitude was the same as peace. She slept on the bed and he took the chair, insisting like it was law, and sometime before dawn he woke to the sound of her crying quiet into the blanket, the kind of crying that does not want comfort but cannot hold itself anymore. He did not touch her, he only said, "You're safe here," and those words surprised him by being true, because safety was not something he had offered anyone since the ground closed over his past morning brought birdsong and awkwardness and a shared laugh. When the coffee burned, She borrowed one of his shirts and rolled the sleeves, looking like she belonged to no one and nowhere all at once. They walked the fence line together, mending where it sagged. And in the work, their bodies learned each other's rhythm. Not intimate, but easy, like two people who knew when to lift and when to let go. And he felt the cabin shift, not in boards or nails, but in purpose. As if it remembered it had once been more than a shelter. They rode into town 2 days later for supplies. Her on a borrowed mare, hair braided tight, eyes forward. The town of Red Willow squinting at them like it always did at anything unfamiliar. Whispers followed the hem of her borrowed skirt, and he felt old anger stir, the kind that flares when people think they own the ending of someone else's story. At the mercantile, she kept her chin high, while women pretended not to stare, and he stood close enough that his shadow touched hers, not claiming, just present. Trouble came the way it often does, wearing a clean coat and a smile that never reached the eyes. The man meant to marry her recognized the shirt on her back as not his, recognized the way she did not flinch when he spoke. Words were exchanged, low and sharp, and when the man's hand reached, she stepped back and said no, clear as church bells, and he moved then, not fast, but final, placing himself between them, voice steady, saying she had made her choice. The town watched breath held, and the man backed down because bullies know when the ground has gone hard under their boots on the ride home. She shook with delayed fear and relief, tangled tight, and he told her she did good, told her she owed nobody an explanation for wanting more than a quiet misery. She asked him what he wanted, and the question hit deeper than any threat, because wanting had been a door he had nailed shut. He said he did not know yet, and that honesty felt like the first real step he had taken in years. That night by the fire she reached for his hand, not in promise but in thanks, fingers warm and steady, and he realized the loneliness that had been his armor was thinning, not because she filled it, but because she saw it and did not turn away. Outside the river kept on talking, not loud now but sure, and he thought maybe some things were meant to carry you forward, not drown you. If you learned how to let them move you, summer settled in slow and honest, the kind that makes the days feel earned, and the cabin changed in small ways that added up. A second chair by the fire, flowers she set in a jar without being asked, laughter that came easier and stayed longer. She learned the land like she had been born to it, learned the moods of the river and the quiet patience of mending rather than fleeing. And he learned that sharing space did not mean losing himself. It meant finding corners of his heart that had been closed so long they felt new. Their closeness stayed careful, built of respect and pauses, but it deepened all the same. Like roots, working underground, she told him one evening that the dreams had changed, that she no longer woke tasting river water and fear. Instead, she dreamed of open trails and choices made with a clear mind. He admitted the nights were easier for him too, the old ache in his legs still there but softened by purpose. They did not name what was growing between them, because names can rush things, but they both felt it. A steady pull not born of need but of understanding, the kind that does not ask you to be smaller to fit. When word came that the man she had fled was leaving the territory, pride wounded but interest spent, she stood quiet a long while, then let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the river. It was over, clean and simple, no chase, no claim, just an ending that let the future stand open. He watched her then, really watched, and realized he did not want to protect her from the world so much as walk it beside her. A truth that scared him more than being alone ever had the choice came gentle, not forced. She asked what would happen when summer passed, when the leaves turned and the road called again. He told her the cabin would still stand, the river would still run, and she would still have a choice. Hearing that, she smiled in that way that reached her eyes and said, "Then, I choose to stay. Not because I have nowhere else, but because I want this." And the weight of that trust settled on him warm and humbling. They shared a first kiss without ceremony. No rush, just a moment that felt like coming home to a place you had forgotten you loved. It held gratitude and hope, and a careful promise to do better than before. The land seemed to approve, wind through the pines, river shining steady, and he understood then that loneliness is not cured by company alone, but by being known and still welcomed. Life did not turn perfect. Fences still broke, storms still came hard, his legs still ached in the cold, but they faced it together. She rode out to help neighbors, finding her own strength and usefulness. He laughed more, letting the past sit where it belonged, without letting it rule him. They became a quiet fact of the valley, not a spectacle. Just two people who had chosen each other with eyes open, and the anniversary of the day the river took her and gave her back. They sat on the bank, watching the water slide by. She said, "Funny how the worst moment can become the doorway to the best one." He nodded, thinking of how close he had come to staying closed off forever, and how a single scream had broken that spell. He took her hand, not tight, just sure, and she leaned into his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. The river kept running, as it always would, carrying stories downstream, but theirs stayed right there, in a leaning cabin, in shared work and chosen love, in the quiet understanding that saving someone does not always mean pulling them from the water. Sometimes it means letting them remind you that you are still alive. And together they stood, not rescued, not lost, just found.